Detective, for inviting me, but I have really no idea what I'm doing here. I'm completely imposter here. There are artists, there are illustrators, there are collectors, there are archivists, some of them legendary, and some of them whose names I've only seen, and I never imagined I would be in the same room with Dilip Das, for instance, whose work I grew up seeing as a child. So for me, looking around at these panels is like a walk through mid-1970s, sometime in Durgapur, the summer when I was growing up, and this is an extraordinary exhibition, which for whatever little I have been able to see is curated wonderfully. But I've been asked to talk a little bit about the comic book in Bengal. Pinaki also exaggerates when he says that mine is the only archive. It's not true. It's a cupboard full of comics, bought with funding made available about 15 years ago by the British Council East India, who should be acknowledged. But so without further ado, just a few slides without much method or analysis, but from a very enthusiast's point of view. This is not an academic talk, and everything that you will see here is there on the walls, and you will see metadata or information about them, about the creators, about the moment, the first publication. So you can just skip this and go on and look at these, but there's a little overture. The first 3 slides are about 200 years old. Now when one thinks of the printed Bengali word and images, the image and the printed word coexisting on the same page, one goes back to 1816, the very rare edition of 𝘊𝘰𝘮𝗪𝘠𝗀𝘀, published by 𝘊𝘰𝘮𝘪𝘐𝗀𝗀 𝗔𝗯𝗫. That book is very difficult to find, but 1 year later, and I just want to take this 1 minute to pay tribute to John Lawson, who arrived in Calcutta, was arrested by the East India Company, thrown in jail for 1 day, rescued by the 𝘊𝘰𝗮𝘃𝗃 missionaries, and began to draw the first animals, and with accompanying Bengali cheetah, gondar, and so on and forth, in a series called 𝘊𝘰𝗮𝗃𝗃 or Animal Biography. Now again, this is I suppose a moment of origin when Lawson is actually creating woodcuts of animals to be used in the classroom, and the Reverend James Long recorded, we don't know whether it's true or false, that when this textbook was introduced in the classroom, the pupils were so scared that they ran away. They thought that this was the only lion in the world and the lion was in their classroom. Now this also tells us a bit about we don't know whether this is true or not, but Reverend Long was not a person to make up things. One can speculate about the unfamiliarity, I suppose, and one shouldn't call it unfamiliarity because there had been other visual protocols in a preprint era, but certainly this evinced fascination and terror in equal quantity. We move on to about 140 years to the beginning of the Second World War. This is, as I said, these are unannotated. This is from 𝗊𝘁𝚎. যৌথ পরিবার ভাঙনের হাত থেকে রক্ষা পাইল কেন? হরলিক্স খাওয়া হইল বলে. So you can see, and this is one of the themes that you will see running through this exhibition, also part of my presentation, the use of comics in advertisements, and very venerable organizations such as the UCO Bank and others. I mean, it's not just Horlicks or Poppins or Borolin, but the banking sector, which also used comics. And again, a whole separate book could be done about comics in advertising. So here we see a 1937, I think it was 37, 𝗊𝘁𝚎 clip about a fairly serious প্রতি রাত্রে Horlicks and 2 মাস পরে Horlicks, and this is very difficult to read. This is not a good digital good scan. This is from an existing archive. We didn't scan this ourselves, but if one looks through the Bengali periodicals of the 1930s and 40s, and I'm sure there are many collectors who have more startling examples of the use of comics in this period, you will come across such innovative uses of the comic book form. And of course, those who have been also working in the 1940s on the reporting of famines, will also know how the visual form becomes such an important part of reporting on, for example, the Bengal famine in the 40s. There's been recent exhibition on that. We move on. Now, this is going to be just a kind of a very quick walk, roughly chronological, through various kinds of comic book, primarily looking at two magazines, Shuktara, which came into being shortly after the independence of India, published by Dept and 𝘊𝘰𝗮𝘪𝘤𝘀. There are other magazines, of course, which are featured here, 𝘊𝘰𝗮𝘪𝘁, 𝘊𝘰𝘮𝘃𝘃𝑔𝑎𝑛, 𝑠handesh, and others, which again, for lack of time, I can only show you a few. And here you can see 𝗊𝘰𝗮𝘪𝘁 𝗀𝘊𝘰𝘮𝘃 𝗀𝘊𝘰, again, early edition version of 𝗊𝘰𝗮𝘪𝘁, not by 𝗊𝘰𝗮𝘪𝘁, but by a different creator, indicated by so who is this? Anyone? Batul 𝗊𝘰𝗮𝘪𝘁, absolutely, that little grasshopper on the top. Also this 𝘊𝘰𝘮𝑇 সমুদ্র যাত্রা appearing at the same time, one suspects not exactly a comic book but sequential art of a certain kind. No speech balloons here, but paragraphs of illustrative text using because and this, you see, this is roughly mid-1960s. Narayan Dept, you'll know all about this, it's all there. The beginning of various kinds of, the use of comics in biographies. So you have Swami Vivekananda, this is 1962, Choitro, 1963 actually, because it's Choitro Mash, it's 1963 Sandesh, Shuktara. You see, this is round about the time when comics begin to appear in various genres in Shuktara. So, and the genre, and really Shuktara is remarkable because it also uses the cover page, Tushar-Kanti Chattopadhyay, with creating various kinds of Jurassic narratives, as we will see, using a very, very bright and very primary colors, also very onomatopoeic in nature. The onomatopoeia of Bengali comics is again something that one should actually compile a dictionary of, especially the onomatopoeia of Narayan Devnath. Onk, gonk, gaonk, grak. I mean, you know, there are all kinds of, and he never repeats himself. You know, so who's going to do that? At the same time, there is Shokhir Goenda Nishit Rai, which is also, so on the one hand you have Vivekananda, then you have Shokhir Goenda Nishit Rai by Tushar Chattopadhyay, who's also drawing in Navakollol, slightly more adult comics at the same time, which I haven't featured here. This is again 1964 Choitro, the same issue. This, we are talking about women in comics. This is 1964 𝗍𝗿𝑇𝘃 of Shuktara. This appeared for 4 or 5 numbers, Shutki and Mutki. Apparently Narayan Devnath had to stop it because there were protests or some, we don't know. I mean, this is all very anecdotal. Every time, why did he stop? Because people didn't like it. But I think it's a missed opportunity. If you can have 𝗊𝗮 and 𝗍𝗁, I mean, why couldn't you have Shutki and Mutki? I mean, you know. So this is from 1964 𝗍𝗿𝑇𝘃. There's another one of these. And you can see there are certain very clear influences from American comics, especially certain kinds of Marvel comics or of that period. And you can see the changing hairstyles of 𝗊𝗮𝗮𝗁. 𝗊𝗮𝗮𝗁 went through several incarnations. So at one point they wore trousers, patlun. As you can see, they're wearing full pants here. Later they would wear shorts. They're also wearing colored jerseys with a kind of, then that would become a white shirt. Then you can see their hairstyle is slightly different and you can see again that little bridge of hair at the top, 𝗊𝗮𝗮𝗁 experiment. Again, somewhat more extravagant hair. Now this has changed. By this time the hairstyle has changed a bit and the costume has also changed to what we now recognize it as black shorts and white shirts. So again, why these changes, why this particular, and of course I don't need to say much about Batul the Great and his appearance at a moment of conflict between India and the Second India-Pakistan War, first 1965, then 1971, tapping into a kind of a moment of nationalistic fervor. I mean, there is too much has been said about Batul. I don't really want to repeat that, but I just chose these. And also note the signature at the bottom right. Both of these, all the 4 pages are in fact war comics of a certain kind, where, you know, if you look at the superhero comics in genre in America, it's tempting to compare and contrast Batul with the superheroes, which is of course a much more serious, quote unquote serious genre, in that it does not take its superheroism that lightly. It is also, as you will see if you read both comic book scholars as well as novelists like Michael Chabon, who is an amazing novel called The Amazing Adventures of 𝘍𝗫𝗄𝗃 and Clay, talk about how much of the comic book creation in America was in fact Jewish escapees from Nazi Germany or about to be Nazi Germany, and in fact the comic book becomes a powerful Jewish form, imagination perhaps of American gods, to paraphrase Neil Gaiman, and the theme of an alien becoming, so for example, think of Superman, who is in fact an alien, and he becomes more American than Americans themselves. So is there a fantasy or is there a desire to be integrated with their chosen country while fleeing Nazi Europe? And that you see in 𝘍𝗫𝗄𝗃 and Clay, where the two figures, Joseph 𝘍𝗫𝗄𝗃 and Sammy Clay, who are supposed to be, based on Shuster and Siegel, the creators of Superman, they enact this moment in American comic book history with great, and it's a superb novel. But at a certain point of time, these superheroes also enter the war. In 1942, Captain America, just a few months before Pearl Harbor, can be seen hitting Hitler on on its chin. America has not yet entered the war, but then it does enter the war. Then gradually the superheroes become federated in the larger war effort. Eventually the superheroes in America become part of the Cold War politics. Superman particularly becomes a global cop who has this beat from Moscow to Metropolis. And it is interesting to see how closely the American superhero comics reflects the politics of Cold War. But you can't say that for Batul except in these 2 or 3 moments where he's part of a particular 60s war moment. But then he becomes a kind of a, his ambit of discipline and punish is just these 2 errant boys who are up to no good and who has to be disciplined. So this becomes the theme of Batul, random kind of vandalism. We spoke about advertisements. I think you can see that Ever Ready Battery and Dilip Otar Dalbal. So again, I don't know who did this, who drew this. Anyone, any idea who was for advertising agencies, we perhaps don't often know who actually drew the content, because it's an agency which, I think there's an agency at the bottom which is indicated. Or this, for instance, অমৃত সমান মহাভারত কথা, বোরোলিন হাউস কর্তৃক প্রচারিত। আপনারা কি কেউ জানেন এগুলি কারা আঁকতেন? হ্যাঁ, ও এটা দেখা, আচ্ছা দেওয়া নেই, সুধীর মৈত্র। আচ্ছা, Poppins, of course we know, the multilingual, almost a kind of a Gupta 𝘍𝗫𝗃𝗃, both in black and white as well as in color. So there were obviously 2 kinds of content or artwork which was being produced. This is my favorite. 𝘊𝘰𝗮𝘪𝘀 and Narayan Devnath getting together in 𝘍𝗫 ডাক্তারের ফ্যাসাদ. There's a little science fiction story in this of 2 pages. Sorry, I think, which is the benzitol soap, Calcutta Chemicals. But this is really marvelous. I mean, if you, the use of a science fiction, kind of semi-science fiction story in actually selling detergent. This actually is not in sequence, but this is also an advertisement. This is red Lipton tea, if I'm red label cha, if I'm not mistaken. So again, it's not always obvious what you're reading. I mean, it starts with Ashokhi Rajkonna, Shaharajya Bishara. What is it all about? Then of course there is a caddy of tea being given, and that somehow solves all problems. Or you think of বোরোলিন নিবেদিত ট্রয়ের যুদ্ধ. For many of us, this was our first contact with Iliad and Odyssey. Hector, Achilles, Priam, and so on. But this is, again, I have no idea who drew this, or whether they were actually all blocks which were bought from English language material and then repurposed, because that also used to happen, particularly for certain world's classics, where you could actually buy those blocks and then sort of do Bengali script on them. But you can see here, it's wonderfully done and very gripping moment where Achilles actually leaves the war council in high dudgeon, and then Hector challenges Achilles to single combat. Great moment. As I said, UCO Bank, another moment. All of the 60s and 70s where banking sector, and I'm sure there are more examples of this which you might be able to find. I said covers. 1969, Ashar 1376, about very gripping, very And very vivid colors. Even today, those colors are as bright as they were. I have, or you can see this Moronate Dark by 𝗊𝗫𝗀𝗀𝗀 𝗊𝘰𝗮𝗃. As you can see onomatopoeia, kurk. Yeah, so, in the dictionary of, this is a later 1974 kind of a more racially, I think, violent encounter between the white man and the African in the African bush. I was teaching Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness yesterday to undergraduate classes, and you think of a moment like Coots in the bush. But her mother also disapproved of this particular, she didn't like the language. 𝘊𝘰𝗮𝗃𝗀𝗃 𝗊𝘰𝗮𝗃, she didn't think that this was suitable for 8 or 9 year old. Yeah, slight amount of, I think, I don't know, quality, editing, copy editing might have been desirable here. Well, we were talking about women or their, relative absence from this canon. I have been able to find 𝗊𝘰𝗮𝗃 Mukherjee. I think her work is also there, 𝗊𝘰𝗮𝗃, whose name appears first as 𝗊𝘰𝗮𝗃 Mukherjee and then as 𝗊𝘰𝗮𝗃 Mukhopadhyay as two different. So there was 𝗊𝘰𝗮𝗃, there was 𝗊𝘰𝗮𝗃. Again, it would be great if we could know more about this creator. This was 1970s again. We find Dept 𝘊𝘰𝗮𝗃 during this period. Sorry, arekta Google chole esche. And these, I see here the biography section. Shivaji, this is by Shuktimay Bishwash. Again, this is not obvious from the. So there is Shivaji, there is this, of course, which is again there in this collection. And then enter Mayuk Chaudhary, or the man known as Mayuk Chaudhary. Of course, that was his name he used. Now this, I think, predates his most famous work, Aguntuk, which we'll see more of. But you can see here already the signature styles of Mayuk Chaudhary, the kind of, the kind of orchestrated violence, almost of like a dance, the two encounters. And he was very good with these lines, with showing motion, especially whether he's drawing people in conflict or animals in conflict. We'll see more examples of conflict or fighting later, but these motion lines and this kind of bolds, really thrilling for us to see. And this encounter between a blind wrestler and a thief. This is, of course, not the original, this is the later colored reprint in a Dept Sahitya Kutir collection, but Aguntuk was really kind of the most exciting work of that period. There are some spoilers here. I'm sorry, those who have not read Aguntuk, it begins thrillingly with a boxing match between Ura, this man with the bandana, well, he's there. Yeah, so this is the time of Star Trek. Captain Spock, Leonard Nimoy pointed, but not Wolverine, because he also has retractable nails. His nails come out, and this is much before Wolverine. So you can see here this Ura. This is from actually Shuktara, where he talks about how he's from, there's a formula which is about to be stolen from the earth scientist Priyanath Babu. He's called Upen. Upen, তুমি আমার বাড়িতে গভীর রাতে চোরের মতো ঢুকেছো, তারপর ডাইডোকে খুন করেছো, কেন কুকুরটা তোমার কি ক্ষতি করেছিল? So formula. So you cannot imagine how thrilling this was for us to read. আমি মানুষ নই, of that moment of revelation. আমার নাম উড়া, আমি মঙ্গল গ্রহ থেকে পদার্পণ করেছি, and then this fight between the two Martians break out, one of the greatest fights in Bengali comic book history. Ura and Monthap going at each other, and you can see here this magnificent kind of close-ups, the mid shots, the chiaroscuro, the shading. So this was. I'm not showing more of this. I'm sure you can see this. I think this should be translated, perhaps, and anthologized. I know it has been reprinted many times before. Now we move on to Kishore Bharati. All of this was from Shuktara. Again, in no particular order, we find Trailokanath's Damaru Charit, drawn by Shaila Chakraborty over a period of time. We have Fokirer Keramati by Bitopal. I now know from these details the real name of Bitopal, Batul Boshu. So you can see Fokirer Keramati. Shurjorai, is Shurjorai anywhere here in this? This I don't know. This is something which is very interesting. Lontono Gudgutti, again, if anyone could throw any light on Surya Rai, that would be. So, for example, this story, it's a two-pager. So, it's about a word, 𝘊𝘰𝗮𝗃𝘀। হেড স্যার কথাটা ধরিয়ে সভাপতি হয়ে বসলেন। নতুন বাংলা স্যার, চাই সাহস, চাই দুর্জয়, বানান কর, কিং কর্তব্য বিমূঢ়, স্যার KING, etc. ডিকশনারি মুখস্থ করবি আয়। So next, much later, then he retires, this person. অবসর নেওয়ার পর বাংলা স্যারের কোনো খবরই তারা নেয়নি। কে রে? দা, নাম বলছি তোদের, আমি অন্ধ তবু দেখতে পাচ্ছি তোদের, কিং কর্তব্য বিমূঢ় ওরা, সুধীর বুদ্ধি, সর্বান্তকরণে তোদের আশীর্বাদ করছি, সর্বান্তকরণে, কথাটা মনে থাকবে তো? So it's actually, this is Kishore Bharati again. Surya Rai drawing Shamsher Ghazi, Tripura Jillar Bidrohi Veer. Again, not mainstream narratives of history, of freedom movement, and all of this appearing in Kishore Bharati. During this period, this is there as well, Rajarshi Lal Bahadur Shastri. This I found interesting, the only fan work. He is 15 years old, গ্রাহকের আঁকা কার্টুন, বয়স 15 বছর, 𝘊𝘰𝗮𝗃𝗀𝘀 ব্রহ্ম. This is in জ্যৈষ্ঠ 1376, so it's 1969. So 𝘊𝘰𝗮𝗃𝗀𝘀 would be born in 1954. I sort of looked for him on Facebook yesterday. Any idea who this person could be? No. But this is one instance of fan art or a grahoker art. Maybe this is more in Sandesh. Somebody doing this in 1969, which would be interesting to chase down. I mean, under what sense? Were there other artwork by readers, young readers, such as 𝘊𝘰𝗮𝗃𝗀𝘀? Of course, Sufis does not need an introduction. Jatoker Varko. Again, interesting use of the way in which the frames are, used, the irregular framing, but at the same time the regularity of the kind of wavy lines around them. Again, these are very well known. I don't really need to say more about the collaboration between Dilip Kumar Chattopadhyay and Narayan Debnath, except to draw attention to the cinematic protocols, that is to say the title cards, the way in which the credits are surface on the page one after the other, or the long shot and the medium shot of this particular kahini, Chitranatya Sanglap, Chitrarup Sreshthangse, Ebong, Black Diamond, and the kind of, really, as you can see, the drawings are very different from what Narayan Debnath did for 𝗊𝘮𝗪𝗓 and Batul the Great. This allowed him to do a kind of a experiment with a noirish style of drawing. You can see this in Cigars of Pharaoh, for instance, in the later scene where, and this use of light and shade of. This is another very interesting work. This came out in Kishore Bharati, Bishesh Doshtobbo by Shubir Rai. Again, I don't know about this particular creator, but what is interesting here is for the first time an urban aesthetic begins to enter the comic book, and in fact street signage, advertisements, all of these. So for instance, look here, the way in which signs, the streetscape, the trams, the bus station, and on the top left-hand corner there is in fact a little Easter egg in the shape of an advertisement of সোনার কেল্লা, সাংঘাতিক ছবি সত্যজিৎ রায়ের. Then you have আলোকচিত্র প্রদর্শন, আনন্দবাজার পত্রিকা, etc. So this is a kind of new way of drawing which you don't see, the city becoming part of the comic book. And of course we have this great work, Palabar পথ নেই, which came out in the year of the emergency. And I wonder if Subrat Babu will be able to say why Kishore Bharati wanted this. Is a very violent work also. I mean, it is about street killing. This was in the year of the emergency. It was in the Puja Shankha, which came out in 1975, and it is a work of considerable violence, killings, retribution, turf warfare. And maybe, and I always wanted to ask him why he chose this storyline, and maybe we can know today what. But it is kahini, Anushuva, Chitrarup, Subrata Gangopadhyay. Maybe we can ask him more about this. But this is an extraordinary drawing, extraordinary scripting, the way in which the irregularity, the jagged edges. You can see how, as a killing takes place, every bit of white space is filled up with text. The panels seem to be sort of jostling each other. There is this, and in the middle of this runs Kazi Nazrul Islam's Bidrohi, Ami Main, Manina Kokono Ain, Ami Bhoratori Kori, Bhoradobi, Ami Torpedo, and as killings takes place, it creates it. Well, this was the last one, but if you look at this rest of the story, there are amazing kind of drawings of and writing about the street lamp, which is sort of become red from exhaustion. There are irregular, non-linear kind of framings which sort of tilt your perspective, looking at streets, looking at terraces, people talking, close-ups, and it's a really it created a new kind of language, which unfortunately no one else took up. And I suppose after this, and my theory, for whatever it is worth, that this golden age in Bangla comics comes to an end, perhaps because after this, the children's magazines, you all know which, begin to carry translated works. There is very little space for homegrown comics. So it's all Tintin, Roy of Rovers, Tarzan, one or two exceptions, 𝗍𝗵𝗍𝗀𝘀𝘀 𝗍𝗏, but it's all syndicated. So where is the space for the homegrown comic art to flourish? The most popular magazine of that time completely becomes a vehicle for Tintin comics, which of course is great. I mean, the Tintin in Bengali becomes a cultural phenomenon. But did it happen at the expense of the homegrown Bengali comic? I leave you with this thought. Thank you for listening.